The two men just wanted a quick elevator ride. To their surprise, as the doors opened, a group of masked strongmen stood outside. They say knowing your time and place makes you wise. But these strongmen refused to understand, so there was no other choice. The man before them is Carlos, captain of Mexico's Special Forces team, Gale. In Mexico, the name Gale means bad luck and a loss of interest. Carlos is the living embodiment of those two words. He is every enemy's nightmare. He always appears when opponents are most careless, then delivers a fatal blow. Beyond him, all other members in the team are also elite members of the military. Shadow is the team's ace assassin. He works calmly, strikes swiftly, and often, before the enemy understands what happened, the battle is already over. Lieutenant is the team's brain, with a cool head and quick reaction. Even if a mountain collapses before her, her expression won't change. She can always offer crucial advice at the most critical moments, hitting the dead center. Rookie is the team's rookie. Although he is new, he has shown astonishing combat skills. Brave and decisive, these are the most resolute members of the team. Each of them is a rare elite, but all will change tonight. The entire team unexpectedly received an urgent mission. A large drug cartel was dealing merchandise somewhere. The members immediately rushed to the mission site. What can stop us? Not even death frightens us. What if things go wrong? We stay calm in danger. For them, ordinary drug dealers were nothing more than chickens or lapdogs, unable to withstand a single blow. Lie down and drop your weapons. Even then, the drug lord's guards still attempted to resist. As a result, Carlos delivered a few blows, breaking both of his arms. He walked up to the drug lord, staring intently at him. Carlos never expected this drug kingpin to be him. This man's name was Luna, and he was an army colonel. Because he had caught Luna, Carlos was publicly commended by his superiors. Initially, this was just a superficial act, giving Carlos a bit of glory, then forcing him to keep quiet. But Carlos publicly stood on the podium to receive his award, directly confronting his superiors for their irresponsibility. Do you honestly think we have completed our mission this time? This man, Luna, was once your comrade. He had always been leaking our weapons, under the protection of the very people in these uniforms. I'm going to tell you something. My team and I will absolutely not let this matter go. Regardless of their rank, high or low, we will find everyone who conspired with Luna. Carlos's words made the high-ranking officials on stage turn cold. This was nothing less than a public declaration of war against them. In that fleeting moment, the atmosphere at the scene turned incredibly cold. Afterward, a female colonel actively sought out Carlos, smiling outwardly but not from within. She then offered a word of congratulations. Just enjoy your leave thoroughly, she said, but Carlos clearly didn't recognize the ill will in her voice. Afterwards, he excitedly took his wife on a vacation. On the way, they also met Shadow, who was also taking his wife on vacation. The two couples happily shared stories about the happiness in their families. Shadow even urged Carlos to have a child soon, just like him. They had no idea that danger was slowly drawing closer. That evening, Carlos and Shadow sat by the pool, drinking and chatting. Just at that moment, the lights in the villa suddenly went out, followed by a terrible scream. Carlos immediately realized something was amiss and quickly rushed straight towards the villa. But ultimately, he was one step too late. When Carlos returned to the room, his wife had long collapsed in a pool of blood, but Carlos had not yet recovered from his profound pain. A masked assassin, holding a knife, lunged from behind to ambush him. Although Carlos reacted very quickly, the assassin still managed to stab him in the stomach. Carlos struggled with great difficulty to escape him, grabbing everything in the room to fight back. However, the assassin was clearly well trained, fighting each time as if to trade wounds for a life. Carlos was completely forced into a dead end. The assassin squeezed Carlos's neck tightly, then covered his face completely with a plastic sheet. Carlos barely managed to break free with all his might. However, the assassin then grabbed him, thrusting him straight through the wall. Unexpectedly, that forceful impact accidentally helped Carlos grab a nearby wine rack. Carlos immediately stabbed the assassin relentlessly, until he saw his opponent finally collapse. Carlos didn't have time to finish him off, instead rushing to his wife to check her condition. Unexpectedly, the assassin wasn't dead. He seized the opportunity to forcefully push Carlos from upstairs. Carlos completely lost his reaction. 6 months later, Carlos did not die during that terrible night. His good friend, Shadow, defied the risk of retaliation from military superiors, secretly rescued Carlos, then took him to a safe house in the countryside. For the past 6 months, Carlos hadn't forgotten a single second of what he experienced that night. Beautiful memories of the past with his wife incessantly tormented his heart. A fire, named revenge, was burning fiercely within Carlos's heart. However, wanting to seek revenge was not an easy matter, though he knew for sure that the assassin was sent by high high-ranking military officials. But other than that, Carlos knew absolutely nothing. Thus, he decided to start his investigation with Luna. If he could only make Luna talk and force him to reveal his accomplices, he could then find each one to uncover who ordered the assassin that year. Carlos asked Shadow to help him find a chance to meet Luna, but Shadow told him that after his arrest, Luna wasn't sent to prison but had been confined in a military base somewhere. Carlos, of course, understood that this so-called confinement was actually disguised protection, relying solely on two of them. There was absolutely no hope of sneaking in, which only caused Carlos more pain. To comfort his good friend, Shadow gave Carlos some money, telling him to go shopping to cheer up. Unexpectedly, as soon as Carlos turned around, he put all 3,000 pesos into lottery tickets. From then on, the gears of fate began to turn. The next day, when the lottery results were announced, Carlos was astonished to discover that the winning numbers were identical to his ticket. Overnight, he went from a penniless, homeless man to a rich magnate with an estate worth 10 billion pesos. However, last night, due to drunkenness, Carlos had forgotten the jacket with the lottery ticket in a taxi. He immediately ran straight to the taxi stand. Initially, Carlos intended to speak civilly, but unexpectedly, the drivers deliberately made things difficult. Carlos immediately flew into a rage, taught those insolent men a lesson they'd never forget, and retrieved his jacket from the car. Not long after, Shadow saw Carlos publicly answering media interviews on TV, and he immediately frowned deeply. At the same time, the high-ranking officers, secretly conspiring with each other, also saw the news that Carlos was still alive. A burly, bald man immediately darkened his face because, in the interview, Carlos had publicly declared that he would not simply drown in money. "I will use this money to find and kill every one of those bastards who caused my wife's death." However, the female colonel from before merely offered a contemptuous smile. After watching the interview, Shadow quietly stepped out onto the balcony and lit a cigarette. Although it was still brightly sunny outside, he could feel a massive, overwhelming wave approaching. Sure enough, that very evening, the female colonel actively sought out Shadow, asking if he and Carlos were still in contact. Shadow did not deny it. The female colonel feigned sympathy for Carlos, then asked if their revenge plan now had specific target. If they needed help, she could provide them with a list. After Shadow refused, she adopted a semi-threatening tone, warning him not to bring trouble upon himself. After speaking, she turned and left. Watching the female colonels retreating back, Shadow's heart remained unsettled for a long time. Carlos was now completely alone, but Shadow still had his wife and child. Not long after, Carlos indeed came to him. He didn't beat around the bush, stating his purpose was to ask Shadow to join him in seeking revenge. Carlos also revealed to him that Lieutenant and Rookie had both already agreed. After a brief moment of silence, Shadow also gave his answer. "Edith wants to take Ines away. I don't want them to be in danger, so I'm withdrawing." Carlos understood the internal conflict of his old friend, but without Shadow's help, he also knew very well that he could not eliminate those corrupt high-ranking officials. Carlos immediately offered an exorbitant price, saying if Shadow agreed to help him, he could have as much of the 10 billion as he wanted. However, Shadow still refused. Compared to his family, money was simply not worth mentioning. Now, the only thing he could do was send Carlos a sincere wish of good luck. Watching Shadow's back as he walked away, Carlos also fell into silence. After leaving Shadow, Carlos immediately messaged Rookie and Lieutenant, inviting them to meet at his 8-star hotel for a meeting. As soon as the two stepped through the door, the luxurious scene before their eyes made them dizzy. The room was full of rare delicacies, many dishes they had only heard of, never seen. Carlos then offered a huge bonus, equivalent to $60 million for them to take. Like Shadow, they both refused the money. "You saved my life. That's not about money. You know, just give the order and I'll follow." They then used the money to buy many weapons and hired 2 skilled mercenaries, forming a 5-person team. Carlos's plan was to infiltrate the patrol, sneak into the base unnoticed. Then, they would quickly snatch Luna. Lieutenant also approved the plan and added a few details. Just then, Rookie returned, driving a small, modified, armored car. They would use this car to infiltrate the military base. Once ready, the team acted immediately. Rookie bribed the guards. Once inside the barracks, he hacked the camera network, hiding Carlos's team's actions. Thus, the four approached Luna's quarters. Seeing them fully armed, the guards wisely raised their hands in surrender. Then, Carlos and the others forced their way into Luna's residence. Before Luna knew what was happening, Carlos knocked him out with a rifle butt. But then, an unexpected event. An officer passing Luna's quarters saw his comrade on guard outside. He loudly questioned their identity. The comrade turned and ran. The officer, realizing something was wrong, drew his gun and pursued. Lieutenant quickly advanced, covering his teammates' retreat, but the officer was too fast and a gunfight erupted. Luckily, a military band was playing outside. The drums masked the gunshots. Carlos immediately ordered Luna removed. The group quickly retreated along the planned route and boarded the escape car. Once in the car, Carlos told the 2 mercenaries to take the money and and leave. Their performance was too amateur. They almost exposed the team. Back at base, Carlos personally interrogated Luna. "Tell me everything you know, you bastard." But Luna's stubbornness exceeded Carlos's expectation. Even with 2 nails in his thigh, Luna remained silent. Seeing this, Carlos threatened his wife and children. "You think I can't find your wife and kids?" But Luna's coldness was beyond Carlos's prediction. "Cut their throats like they cut your wife's?" Luna hadn't even finished his sentence. A bullet instantly exploded his head. Carlos and the others took cover. Bullets whizzed over their heads. Enemies were everywhere outside. They were completely surrounded. Lieutenant, under heavy fire, returned fire while retreating to the armored car. Carlos and the other followed close behind. The 3 drove erratically through the warehouse. They pushed back the enemies and sped outside. Just as they thought they were safe, a car sped out from behind, chasing them. The 3 immediately knew something was wrong. Carlos floored the accelerator, but the enemy still caught up. Luckily, the armored car was strong enough not to be destroyed. Rookie drew his gun and shot at the car behind them, but the enemy also used an armored car. Bullets couldn't penetrate the bulletproof glass. Then the enemy closed in and attached a bomb to Carlos's car. The violent explosion dizzied everyone. Carlos knew he couldn't fight them head on. He quickly steered into a crowded street. Then he told Rookie and Lieutenant to throw out money. Seeing money flying everywhere, people rushed to collect it. The car behind couldn't brake, running through the crowd. Carlos seized the chance to quickly escape with the 2. Only when they returned to Carlos's safe house did the group relax. Carlos quietly lit a cigarette. The key witness, Luna, was dead. Now their leads were completely cut off. They wanted revenge but had no one to find. Then Lieutenant mentioned the group who ambushed them. Their methods were very similar to the Gale Squad. This immediately darkened Carlos's face. Rookie tried to hack the barracks camera system again, but the other side upgraded their firewall. After much thought, Carlos again thought of Shadow. After all, he was the expert. After Rookie and Lieutenant left, Carlos recalled his wife's murder. His heart felt another sharp stab. No matter the cost, he vowed to avenge his wife. So the next day, Carlos sought out Shadow again. As they met, Shadow questioned him in an unpleasant tone. "Why are you still looking for me?" He already told Carlos he refused. Plus, yesterday they snuck into barracks and killed soldiers. If caught, they would be shot dead. Carlos begged Shadow, invoking their brotherhood, to help him again. But for his wife and daughter, Shadow knew he couldn't get involved. He refused Carlos again. As he left, Carlos mentioned their attackers seemed to be from Gale Squad. Shadow immediately froze. Every Gale Squad member had sworn a blood oath. He couldn't believe there was a traitor among them. That night, Shadow used his connections to review Gale Squad's past 10 years of ex-members. The list only had 4 names. 3 disobeyed orders. 1 was recorded dead. He opened the file and was shocked. The comrade, codenamed Jacko, attacked him and Carlos at the resort that night. Clearly, someone helped him fake his death years ago. But Shadow didn't immediately tell Carlos. Instead, he went to see the female colonel. He was hesitant to join, so he hoped the colonel could advise him. The colonel didn't answer, but led him to a group of generals. She said they were discussing transferring Shadow north. Then he might not see his family for 1-2 years, all because he followed Carlos. Then the colonel, as an old friend, advised Shadow to stop dealing with Carlos. Now, the military saw Carlos as a terrorist who stormed barracks and killed soldiers. The colonel even provoked Shadow. If he was still a soldier, he should arrest the culprit. At this moment, Shadow was in deep conflict. Meanwhile, Carlos prepared for his next plan. Unexpectedly, Rookie asked to leave. He had only taken leave, which let him help Carlos. His leave was over. He had to return to barracks. A deployment order from superiors had been issued. Soon he'd be in the jungle on a mission. Carlos was reluctant. Rookie couldn't leave Carlos, whom he considered family, so he decided to defy the order. Carlos was deeply moved by Rookie's choice. Soon, Carlos went to a luxurious villa, carefully sneaking inside, but no one was inside. In the deepest room, Carlos saw many surveillance photos of him and his wife. Clearly, this was Jackal's hideout. Carlos, finding this place clearly meant Shadow had made his choice. Back home, Carlos called Shadow, very grateful for his help. Too bad Jackal seemed to know and had escaped. Carlos then asked about Shadow's family, confirming they had left. Only then did he breathe a sigh of relief. Then Shadow said he had new info for Carlos and arranged to meet at their usual spot. Carlos didn't suspect a thing, telling Lieutenant to come and provide backup outside. When Carlos arrived at the bathhouse, he immediately messaged Shadow, but he didn't know Shadow was with the colonel's subordinate. Clearly, this was a trap aimed at Carlos. Shadow messaged Carlos he'd arrive in 10 minutes, using this to stall him. Almost at the same time, Rookie met his superior to resign from the army, but was told to immediately report to Supreme Command. Despite his suspicions, Rookie still obeyed the order. However, upon arriving, guards disarmed him. Meanwhile, Lieutenant, watching outside, sensed something was wrong. A group was aggressively approaching Carlos. She immediately sent a message to Carlos. Carlos reacted fast, but was one step too late. He had just entered the changing room. The next second, the bathhouse plunged into darkness. Then, a pale yellow mist spread throughout the bathhouse. Meanwhile, Rookie was brought before the the Colonel. She revealed Rookie and Carlos were secretly in contact. His resignation was surely because of Carlos. Without waiting, the Colonel forced him to reveal Carlos's plan. In return, I won't hold you accountable and will release you. Rookie firmly told the Colonel he would not betray his comrade. This completely enraged the Colonel, and so Rookie died at the Colonel's hand. At the same time, Lieutenant was anxiously waiting for Carlos outside. Just then, Jacko suddenly appeared beside her. He smashed the car window and dragged Lieutenant out. Fierce street battle immediately erupted. Their strength was equal, a winner hard to determine. Inside the bathhouse, Carlos's movements became erratic from the gas. With his last will, he took a steel pipe and broke the window. He didn't even dress, fleeing the bathhouse in a hurry. He ran to Lieutenant, then quickly got in the car and escaped. Jacko's subordinates then arrived one after another. They fired wildly at the car. Lieutenant was unfortunately shot. Carlos could only urgently grab the wheel and drive off. He quickly drove Lieutenant away from this place. Meanwhile, the Colonel's subordinates took Shadow to a secluded place. Shadow subtly sensed their hostility. Before they could act, he struck first, killing the two subordinates. He then rushed to Carlos's home to check on his friend. As he entered, he saw blood splattered on the floor. Shadow rushed upstairs, seeing medics urgently treat Lieutenant. Shadow's heart was filled with regret. He didn't know how to face his friend, so he smoked on the balcony. Carlos appeared, and without a word, slapped Shadow hard. Shadow explained, the Colonel said she'd only apprehend Carlos's group, not harm them. He was also tricked by the Colonel. Carlos understood. The Colonel was the true mastermind. She had manipulated all of them. Carlos lowered his gun, inviting Shadow to seek revenge on the Colonel. At this point, Shadow no longer had any reason to refuse. Before leaving, he video called his family, saying he had an urgent mission and couldn't contact them for days. Meanwhile, Carlos called the Colonel, saying he knew she was the mastermind. He swore he'd make the Colonel pay blood for blood, but she disdainfully gave an address, saying she'd wait there for Carlos. After hanging up, the Colonel immediately arranged countless subordinates in ambush. Carlos knew the Colonel had set a vast trap for him, but his heart was consumed by the fire of revenge. Even facing great danger, he would not hesitate. Carlos and Shadow were fully armed. Before the final battle, Carlos fell into a brief trance. In a haze, he saw his wife's silhouette again. She seemed to stand beside him, gently looking at him as always, encouraging Carlos to move forward bravely. At this moment, Carlos's eyes were filled with determination. Soon after, he and Shadow approached the building, but they did not recklessly rush in to their deaths. Instead, after observing, they crept along the wall's hidden corners, sneaking in. As they entered, they immediately froze. The Colonel had thrown Rookie's body in the lobby on the first floor. This was a warning and an insult to Carlos. Carlos gently drew out that weapon. He swore to Rookie he would avenge his death. Then the two entered the elevator, going straight to the top floor. But when the elevator was halfway up, it suddenly stopped. At this moment, the atmosphere seemed to freeze. In this situation, even Tyson would surely die a gruesome death. Carlos and Shadow exchanged a glance, then charged at the enemy. In the narrow elevator car, everything immediately turned chaotic. Gunshots and slashing sounds rang out continuously. Carlos and Shadow were killing machines, precisely taking enemy lives. Carlos was the first to fight his way out of the elevator. He blocked the remaining enemies, helping Shadow reduce pressure. With his accurate shooting and agile movement, he swept through the battlefield unstoppably, like a dragon. An enemy tried to ambush him from behind. Carlos sent him flying out, then pinned him down and beat him senseless. But there were truly too many enemies. Carlos couldn't fight on all sides alone. He was unfortunately captured alive. He was brought before the Colonel. She mocked Carlos's helplessness. Clearly, she was standing right in front of him, but he couldn't avenge his wife and comrades. The Colonel slashed Carlos's face with a knife, carving a loser's mark. At the same time, Shadow finally dealt with all the enemies in the elevator, but he was also stabbed in the thigh. Shadow suppressed the pain, running with all his might toward Carlos. The Colonel slowly thrust a dagger in Carlos's collarbone. She intended to kill him with this ultimate humiliation. In this critical moment, Shadow suddenly leaped from above. Carlos seized the chance, immediately counterattacking the Colonel. As for Shadow, he lunged for Deco's leg. Though the Colonel was armed and Carlos heavily wounded, the power imbalance between them was too clear. Carlos found the Colonel's weakness. He slashed her neck. He then stabbed her twice in critical areas. Carlos had no time to rest. He immediately ran to reinforce Shadow. The power gap between Shadow and Deco was too great. Soon, Shadow was pushed to the brink. Carlos's aid gave him a chance to breathe. Both sides fiercely fought on the broken glass floor. All of them unfortunately fell from above. Carlos clung tightly to the edge of the floor, while Deco clung to his leg. Shadow moved forward to help. He was also pulled down. Seeing this, Deco stabbed Carlos with a knife, using that as leverage. Slowly climbing up, Carlos's eyes flashed with decisive resolve. He voluntarily let go of Shadow, taking Deco with him to die. Days later, Shadow stood on the rooftop commemorating Carlos. A voice suddenly echoed from behind. Surprisingly, it was Lieutenant. She brought the payment Carlos had prepared for Shadow. The film ends here. Thank you all for watching. Your Your likes, comments, and subscriptions are our greatest encouragement. See you all in the next video.